Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is David Godwin and I'm the director of the Southern Fire Exchange program with the University of Florida. Thank you for joining us today. I see some folks already have, but please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat window and let us know where you're joining us from today. Please also take a moment to respond to the poll on the screen and let our speakers know if you have used LANDFIRE data in the past. Today I'm excited about our presentation today from Jim Smith with the TNC LANDFIRE Program Lead with the Nature Conservancy. Today Jim will be talking about and showing some of the most recent data updates from the LANDFIRE program for the Southeast. We have been approved for 1 hour of Category 1 SAF CFE credit for our webinar today. I'll be posting the CFE link in the chat window at the end of the webinar. So to be eligible for credit, please provide your information via that link. We have time reserved at the end of our hour today for a question and answer session with Jim. So if you have questions during the presentation or at the end, you can type them in at any time into the Q&A window in Zoom. And finally, if anyone needs to leave early, this webinar will be recorded and archived on our Southern Fire Exchange YouTube channel in a few weeks. Thanks everybody who shared your feedback via that poll. We've got the results on the screen now. I'm going to close that out. I would like to take just a little moment to share a bit of information about the Southern Fire Exchange. SFE is a regional program for fire science delivery in the Southeast. We are a collaborative among the University of Florida, Tall Timbers Research Station, North Carolina State University, and the U.S. Forest Service Southern Research Station. We're sponsored by the federally funded Joint Fire Science Program, and we're the Southeastern branch of the nationwide Fire Science Exchange Network. Working with our network of partners, we develop programs, opportunities, and events that bridge the divide between the fire science and natural resource management communities. Throughout the South, we host workshops, coordinate webinars like this one, develop fact sheets, and create other content to move science into the hands of managers. And we also, at the same time, work to connect researchers with the pressing and relevant needs of the natural resource management community. We've been busy this spring, and we have over 70 of our past fire science and management webinars recorded and posted to our YouTube webinar archive. You can see some of our recent ones that are now up there. These are great resources for professional development, for RT 130 courses, and online classes if you're at a university. We have another webinar coming up next week, actually, with Dr. Kevin Robertson from Tall Timbers Research Station. Dr. Robertson will be giving a presentation on the fundamentals of prescribed fire in the Southeast. This is designed really to focus on providing a background for folks in the air quality and smoke management community. But really anyone interested in prescribed fire fundamentals is welcome to join us. You can find out more information about this webinar, and to register on our website at southernfireexchange.org. And finally, if you are joining us today from an area outside of the Southeastern U.S., please look into connecting with your local Fire Science Exchange network. These are the folks that are working to connect regional managers and researchers to address local fire science issues and make differences on the ground. You can visit firescience.gov for more information. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Jim is currently the TNC project lead for LANDFIRE, residing in Jacksonville, Florida. Jim earned a BS in timber management and an MS in forest biometrics from the University of Georgia and a Ph.D. in forest biometrics and remote sensing from Virginia Tech. Jim spent the next 13 years on the forestry faculty at Virginia Tech, achieving the rank of associate professor, and served as the director of forest information systems and development for Champion International Paper Company and International Paper Company and Forestry Fire Ecosystem Management Domain Manager for Space Imaging Incorporated. Jim has published in such journals as Fire Ecology, Forest Science, Photogrammetric Engineering and Remote Sensing, Canadian Journal of Forest Research, and the Canadian Journal of Remote Sensing. Jim has received many professional awards, including the 2009 John Wesley Powell Award from the U.S. Geological Survey, the Special Achievement in GIS Award from Esri, and in 2011, the International Spatial Accuracy Research Association named their Early Career Scientist Award the James L. Smith Medal. Very good. Well, thank you, Jim. It's good to have you here with us today, and good to have everybody on the line. And one moment as we trade out presentations.
Hello, everyone, and hopefully this will be sharing soon. Are you seeing it, David?
Yep, it looks good, and your audio sounds good, so go right ahead, sir. Okay,
fantastic. And I'll ask anyone to please let me know if the audio quality or declines, or if I get ahead of the presentation because the sharing is slow. So please let me know if there are any issues like that. So just on behalf of the TNC LANDFIRE team, as well as the entire LANDFIRE program, we want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today about the status and plans of the LANDFIRE program, focusing on the Southeast. And the agenda today will be just a bit about the past, the foundation, then a little bit about where we are today, what's the status, the future, and then we're going to take a tour of the Southeast and look at some of the example products, compare some of them from previous products, but also take a little bit of a deeper dive into what we're delivering now. So at the end, we'll give you a few resources and connections so that you can learn more should you desire to, okay? So let's go right in and talk about what LANDFIRE is. Many people have heard of it. It is basically an interagency multi-partner program that's designed to create comprehensive vegetation and fuel characteristics data across the U.S. The primary partners in the LANDFIRE program are U.S. Forest Service Fire and Aviation Management, Department of the Interior Office of Wildland and Fire, and then also the Nature Conservancy and the U.S. Geological Survey EROS, that's Earth Resource Observation Science Data Center in South Dakota. So all of us are partners, but the real drivers for this program are the two federal land management agencies that you see listed here. So LANDFIRE was created back in 2004 under charter from the Wildland Fire Leadership Council, a long charter, many pages, but I kind of boil that charter down to these 4 C's. There's a lot of details, but I can kind of lay out the design characteristics with these 4 C's, that all LANDFIRE data products must be comprehensive. That is all lands, and that means continental U.S., that means Alaska, Hawaii, and then added to that a few years later were the primary insular territories in the South Pacific and the Caribbean islands. So all lands must be covered in all versions. All the products must be compatible with each other. That is, they must match each other geometrically, and as well as thematically. You don't get strange combinations of things when you layer cake them. Everything matches and is compatible. That the products be as current as possible, as close to today as possible, given the other design criteria. And that has changed over the years, how often we could deliver these things. And we'll talk about where we are today and where we're going in the future about our ability to be more current. And then that the products be developed in a consistent way over space and time. A big issue with LANDFIRE when it was originally created, or a big desire, was to be able to compare at landscape, at regional, at state, at national levels. And in order to do that, we need to be as consistent as possible. We also want to be consistent across time as much as possible. And you'll see we've wavered a bit on that. And I'll talk about that as we go through the presentation today. In the spirit of improving products, we have changed some process, we have changed some products. So there is some inconsistency across time. LANDFIRE delivers 30-meter spatial data layers, 800 plus quantitative state and transition BPS, which is biophysical settings, models and descriptions, delivered versions in circa 2001, updated that product in 8, 10, 12, and 14, and now we're engaged in a remap. So I don't expect you to read this, but this is just to give you an idea of the depth and the breadth of the program. The rows represent the different data types that LANDFIRE has produced. So the red boxes indicate what we call bins, or basically groups of data. Top box would be plot data, events data, things like that, that we use to drive all the mapping processes. The second box is disturbance or change products, either human-caused or natural-caused disturbances, landscape change. The third box are vegetation types, which are things like historic vegetation, current vegetation, height and cover. The big box here are many of the fuel and fire specific data types that LANDFIRE delivers, such as surface fire behavior models for surface fire and canopy characteristics. And then the last group are what we call fire regimes, and we'll talk more about that later. So these are the different product groups that LANDFIRE has delivered over time. The columns represent the different versions, remember 2001 through 2014. The different blue letters in there represent geographies. And we're now engaged in a remap. So what is remap? This is what has been delivered thus far in the remap process. Over the last 2+ years or so, we've been working on a remap where we're actually recreating the products from scratch. There was an original version and then it was updated 5 times. Now we've recreated the products from scratch, learning from what we got right and what we didn't get right, trying to create a better set of basic products that everyone then can use when appropriate. So we've delivered this vegetation and fuels data in the area you see here in the colors. The Northeast will be delivered probably sometime in early to mid-July, I would guess, and that's vegetation and fuels. There are other data layers, such as fire regime, that will be delivered CONUS-wide once these products, veg and fuels, have been completed for all of the continental U.S. If you haven't used LANDFIRE before, you can certainly, I want to give you a quick illustration of where you find the data. It's downloadable on the program website, which is landfire.gov, and I'll repeat that later. If you click on the Earth icon down here, if you click on that, you will get this screen that shows you the 3 different ways that you will be able to get data. One of them is an interactive download site where you draw a box on the screen, select the layers you want to get, and download those to your device. The middle box, when we're complete with CONUS, we will complete an entire CONUS mosaic of the entire nation for all the different data layers. That is not available yet, but will be once CONUS is complete. And then if you prefer to stream data, in other words, not download it to your machine, but use it across the internet, then there are REST or WCS services that you can use to actually connect to the data sets online. So what's remained the same in Remap? Well, same 4 C's, the same design and criteria constraints. We still must be comprehensive, compatible, consistent, and current. We have created the same basic product suite in Remap, but we have made changes based on what we've learned over the past decade or so in order to make the products more usable, we believe. The proof of that will be with people like you who actually go to use the data, but we believe we've actually made them more effective than they were in the past through this remap process. So while the wrapper on the products will look the same, you will see some differences inside. I'm going to mention a few of those specifically as we go through today. An important thing to remember too is that LANDFIRE has the same application scale remap data as it's had in the past. It is designed to reflect conditions at the large landscape, regional, national level, okay? And what that means, that's the native scale that we hope the products deliver an accurate enough picture of the landscape so that you can use them out of the box. Large landscape, regional, national data set. If you go outside of that native application scale, that is, keep zooming in, you may find that you'll need to make some adjustments to it to make it usable, to make it really local data. You should expect to have to make some adjustments to it to reflect local conditions. So it is a large landscape scale database out of the box. And I think that's important for you to remember. It's not designed to replace local data. If you have local data, then by all means, we would expect you to use it. So what's new in Remap? Well, I'm not going to go into all the details, but there are many new processes, there are even new products that we utilized in this new set of data that we call 2016 Remap. So we broke up the country differently in order to do the mapping. Instead of what are known as National Land Cover Database map zones, we used Omernic Level 3 zones to break up the country in order to map it. You can't map the whole country all at once, so you break it up into pieces. Omernic Level 3 are relatively good ecological-wise. They do represent ecological conditions better than NLC map zones. So that was a new framework for mapping. We have new imagery preparation methods. Remember, this product is based upon satellite imagery, so we have to pre-process all this imagery. We have new methods that create a better set of base imagery for us to use. We also have more and more diverse imagery, such as Landsat 8, which is now available to us, was not available to us before. And we've been able to incorporate LiDAR for mapping vegetation structure, which we could not do before. We have many more field plots. Field plots drive the mapping process. We have many more of them available. We never have enough. We want more, but we do have more available to us for mapping this time, as well as new ways of classifying those plots and utilizing them, which we call auto keys. So we spend a considerable amount of time improving how we analyze the plot information before we use it in the mapping process. We were able to incorporate external review of the products before delivery. That's important to catch sort of things that might look out of place or look strange. We had external review that we were then able to make changes to before you ever see it. We conducted a review of the biophysical settings, or BPS models and descriptions, as a part of this remap process. Those will also be available when CONUS is complete. And there are some important new products. We have now an independently mapped NVC group spatial data layer. NVC is the National Vegetation Classification. In the past, we've had to crosswalk it from our native classification, which is ecological systems. But since NVC is now the de facto standard for especially federal projects, we felt it was important to create an independent NVC group map, which has been done and is delivered as a part of the veg and fuels layers. We now have a historic disturbance layer, which sort of compiles a 10-year disturbance information for every pixel. If it was disturbed, we have 10 years instead of individual disturbances, looking primarily at the last disturbance as we have in the past. So that is new. We have something called year-capable fuels products. So LANDFIRE Remap represents conditions at the end of the calendar year 2016, except for in disturbed areas, areas that LANDFIRE mapped as changed in the past 10 years. We do use a process to try to update fuels within those disturbed boundaries to a more current date. Would have been 2019 for things that are delivered last year, 2020 for areas that were delivered this year. So in disturbed areas, we've tried to create a 2020-based fire behavior fuel model layer in disturbed areas. Outside of disturbed areas, fuels would still be 2016. We've also created a new fire regime group schema. This is sort of a categorization method for how people look at the native fire regime for different sites. And we used an off-the-shelf published fire regime group schema originally in LANDFIRE. People found it to be not useful, particularly in areas where the fire return interval was fairly short. So we actually did an analysis and created a new schema, which is backwardly compatible. There were 5 fire regime groups before. We still have those 5 Roman numerals, but we were able to divide the landscape up into 3 subgroups within these Roman numeral 1 and 2 based on the fire return interval. So we have very short, moderately short and short fire return intervals now. Instead of Roman numeral 1 being 0 to 35, it's broken up into 3 categories. The longer fire return interval groups were broken into 2 categories. So you see 36 to 100, 100 to 101 to 200, rather than 36 to 200. And then the fire regime group 5, instead of it being 201 and above, we do 201 to 500 and 501 and above. So we hope that this provides more information for you in your planning. If you have to use fire regime group, that this new map of fire regime will be helpful to you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about quality. Okay, so we provide all the information about quality of data that we have available. We don't have unlimited time and resources to do this, but we do try to create as much of a assessment information as possible to provide to you. And this is available for the Southeast. You can download this, or for any other area in which we've delivered. So we have done EVT, or existing vegetation type assessments, for ecological systems, NVC group, NVC macro group, and then crosswalked from ecological systems. We have an SAF SM cover type assessment as well as an attribute in the layer that allows you to display by SAF SRM cover type if you prefer. We had about 9,000 plots in the Southeast to do this assessment. These were plots that were withdrawn from the mapping process, so they truly are independent plots. We limited how many that we could draw in order to support the mapping process. We would be nice to have more plots. It would be nice to have more plots better distributed geographically and thematically, but 9,000 plots is a pretty significant example. We create a traditional contingency table, which I'm going to show in a moment. And then we also create an example of how to collapse categories in the contingency table. And that'll make more sense to you in a moment. But this is a traditional contingency table. Again, you can download this. This is an actual small piece cut out of the Southeast EVT assessment. Contingency table is basically just a tabulation of a plot that was withdrawn from the sample. What was it called in the database? So this one was Ozark, Ouachita, Dry Mesic Oak Forest, an ecological system. What did we call it in the map? Sometimes we called it the same thing. Sometimes we called it something else. That's a disagreement. Items along the major diagonal or agreements, anything off the major diagonal, you might call a mapping error or a map disagreement. So this is a tabulation across all 9,000 plots that we had to use in the assessment. So this is a nice matrix that does contain a lot of information about the errors we made and where we actually mapped it correctly. The problem with this table is in the Southeast geo area, it's 165 rows by 165 columns. This isn't even the whole contingency table. We assessed 165 different ecological systems in the Southeast geo area. There's actually more than that map, but these are the ones that we assessed. This is really hard, I think, for us to get a lot of information out of, so we're going to talk about another way to look at this data in a moment. But because not many people need 165 different cover types, many people do collapse this matrix in different ways for their particular application. So included with the contingency table is an example of how you add rows and columns to reflect collapsing across categories. For instance, I think we have 4 or 5 different longleaf types. If you want to just look at all longleaf, you might collapse all their rows and columns in this contingency table to give you an assessment value for longleaf pine, or however you collapse it. All hardwoods, or all conifers, or all wetland types, or all upland types, or however you want to collapse them. This is an example of how you could do that. It gives you instructions, okay? I think that's important because not many people actually use that many cover types, say 165. Another way we present the data here is in what we call a category agreement table. So it basically looks across a row in the contingency table and summarizes that information. So I get right here and I pick this second row here, Ozark, Ouachita, shortleaf pine forest and woodland. That was mapped using LANDFIRE reference data. In other words, we mapped it directly. There were other ways we got cover types. For instance, we pulled them maybe from NLCD, National Land Cover Database, or from the cropland data layer. It would indicate in this column if we mapped it ourselves or if we pulled it from someone else. In this case, we mapped it ourselves with a little help from the National Land Cover Dataset. We had 23 plots that fell in this type that we mapped, represents about 3% of the plots. That's sort of a proxy for how important it is on the Southeast landscape. And you can see 72% of the time, our map pixel matched the plot designation, okay? That's pretty good. But importantly here is these columns tell you the most common error we made, the next most common, and the next most common, because sometimes you learn as much by what mistakes you make than by what you actually did correctly. So this would tell you, hopefully tell you, if this mapping of this is useful to you. If you find this error to be acceptable, well, then you might collapse those cases. In this case, this 72% would go up. If you find it to be unacceptable, you might find that that 72% is not good enough. So we try to provide some information that helps you determine the usability of the product. I would caution you that percent accuracy is a good tool. It is useful, but it's not everything. You still need to review the data to determine its characteristics for yourself and for your application. We just hope that this helps you get to that decision as easily as possible. We are also hoping to perform an assessment of vegetation cover and vegetation height soon, and even try to do something for the surface fire behavior models. We have not done that so far, but we hope to do that in the future and provide that information. So what's the future? Well, we're going to complete CONUS over the next month or so, vegetation and fuels. Then we will complete the fire regime product suite. CONUS will be done. We're already working in Alaska and Hawaii and the island territories. We hope to get that done in the next year to year and a half to get those areas all complete. Alaska is a whole different animal, very large, very complicated, so it does take a while to do Alaska. But while we're completing CONUS, we're also developing a new update process. This is a remap, but we're going to have to update it. We're already 2016. We're already 4 years off for some products. We need an update process that reduces the latency of these products. We need to be able to deliver products more quickly with less latency, and that is what we're developing now through using some different options to see if we can deliver within a year, say, or even within a few months or something like that, rather than having to wait in 2 or 3 years for the next set of products. Ask you to watch for announcements. We hope to be making some announcements on our plans sometime in the near future. So I tell you to take a breather, and if you have any questions about what I have talked about so far, please put them in the Q&A box, not in chat, but in Q&A, and we will try to handle those at the end of the webinar. So now I'm going to take a little tour of the Southeast, and I'm going to focus on vegetation here. That is vegetation type, cover, and height. They are the foundation for basically everything else that most people use when they use LANDFIRE products, so I'm going to focus on those. We also have a mental picture in our head for what vegetation is more than we do, say, fuels. Although we could look at fuels, I'm going to look at vegetation type, cover, and height. And I'm going to go to places that I've been to before because I have a picture of them in my head and I can talk a little bit more about them as we proceed. So probably one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue in the Southeastern area when we delivered the original LANDFIRE products and the updates was the undermapping of plantations. Felt like we significantly undermapped what was a southern pine plantation in the southern area. So what I did was I did a screen grab of what we call VPU 11, which is one of those Omernic level 3 map zones. It's not the Southeast Geo area. This is the Omernic level 3 lowlands. I call it the lowland Southeast. And I just rendered all the plantations in red, just so you get a big picture look in just the coastal areas of what we mapped as plantation in LANDFIRE Remap, okay? Now we're gonna zoom in on a little area here over here in Mississippi. I once mapped all of Mississippi for southern pine beetle damage, so I've been to a lot of these areas, and this is between Macomb and Natchez in the area of the Homochitto National Forest. And so there's a little Google Earth image on the left, at the top. This is the original LANDFIRE. This is LANDFIRE Remap. And what I've done is I've colored LANDFIRE plantations black to make them stand out here. Not a very good color scheme cartographically, but it does stand out. So what you see here, and I did this ellipse because you see a plantation here. Obviously, human eye can see that it's a plantation, the density, the square boundaries, the strange shape of it, even shape. Well, if you look at LANDFIRE 2014, you can see the problem we were having. We didn't really render those plantations fully. We had kind of a spotty, speckly look to the plantations, but this is what that same plantation looks like in LANDFIRE Remap. In the Southeast states, the latest figure I could come up with is there are about 32 million acres of southern pine plantation in all of the Southeastern states. Well, just in VPU 11, we mapped about 26 million acres of temperate conifer plantation. So I think we're probably getting pretty close, and we're certainly getting a more natural looking appearance to plantations now than we had in the original product. So now I'm going to zoom in on this square because I want you to see what the nature of the data is. So I just picked this area because it was kind of strange looking and you could really see the patterns. And you can see, you know, you capture the pattern of what's cropland versus forest land, et cetera, pretty well. But you can see this is not a particularly clean. You start to see the speckly nature of image classification from satellite data. That's what I wanted you to see. And that's why when we say you start zoom in on an area, you have to be cautious and consider the fact that you may need to do some adjustments to this if you expected to use this data at the local level. And you may say, well, that looks really odd. Why that? Well, if you look at this, this isn't exactly a smooth texture or a single tone or anything either. And each one of these little 0.2208 pixels, each one of these little orange spots is independently classified by the classifier. So if it gets a slightly different tone or texture, you might get something different. There's a hole in the plantation, or if there is a reduction in density or something like that, you get sometimes these funky little pixely things that you see in there. That's why we don't consider this a local data set. We consider this to be a large landscape scale data set out of the box. Large landscape to me is I start in my head at 100,000 acres and I look at it. Sometimes I can go much deeper than that. There's been a few cases when I had to go bigger than that, say 250,000 acres, to be happy with the way that the data looked and represented the landscape. So I wanted you to zoom in, and we're going to do this several more times so that you could see the true nature of LANDFIRE data. So let's go to the Tall Timbers area, Red Hills, north of Tallahassee. So again, a Google Earth image. And I think you can see this is existing vegetation type from 2016 remap at the bottom, Google Earth on the top. And you can see we've captured the landscape pattern and types pretty well. Black plantation again, I rendered that in black, a bad color for maps, but hopefully you can visualize it. I also went in there and in this instance only changed what we mapped as upland longleaf woodland to yellow. So you can see it's scattered longleaf woodland, the sort of magenta, not magenta, but sort of maroonish color. That's what's called ruderal pine forest. So you can see this is where you start to zoom in on it. You might get a little bit edgy about the landscape, but if you look at the larger scale, it does represent it well. So we're going to zoom in on it here. So you can see what this looks like. I think Tall Timbers is right here in this area here, if you've been there, sort of surrounded, in this case, by yellow, again, upland longleaf woodland. This sort of maroony color is ruderal coniferous forest. Ruderal, sort of a transition term that you might use for something that's transitioning from natural condition or transitioning from a non-natural to a natural condition. And then black would be plantation. And remember that plantation is a practice, not a cover type. We try to map it separately. It is not a cover type, it is a practice. So sometimes it's hard to identify plantations. Very dense areas that are natural stands might look like a natural stand. So it is more difficult than you might think sometimes to separate those things on a classifier. So that's what the Tall Timbers area looks like when you zoom in on it. This again is a much smaller scale than I would call the native application scale for LANDFIRE. We should zoom out a little bit farther to cover 100,000 acres sort of just to see what it looks like. This is St. Johns County, Florida. This is near where I live, in fact, right down the road. long history of intensive pine management. As you can see, again, plantations in black. Many, many plantations here. But it's also an area of great change. All this yellow in this case is not longleaf, it's developed. The purplish color are wettish areas, riparian or wetlands of some kind, cypress ponds, etc. So you can see that this area, we captured this landscape relatively well. I know it. Here's all the developed. Here's areas in development. If we zoom in farther, again, this is what it looks like. Again, it starts to look a little ugly. Don't want to focus on this because this is not how we intend for you to use LANDFIRE data. In most cases, maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. We can't say. We would expect you to use data more at this level. That's a landscape. This is zooming in. See, it looks kind of messy. You see all these individual pixels, this blocky look, etc. Well, sometimes that's the way it looks because this is what that area actually looks like. It is a transition between an old plantation and in development. So sometimes the messiness is the actual landscape broken up into 0.2208 squares that we call pixels, 30 meter on a side. So sometimes that messiness is actually what's there. Sometimes it's an artifact of the mapping process. So we had continuous height and cover data. In the past, LANDFIRE delivered vegetation cover, canopy cover data in 10% classes, height in multi-meter categories, but now we deliver cover in 1% classes. That's all these greens and oranges over here on the left, and on the, on the right. And on the left, you see the tree height categories: 1 meter for trees, 1 meter for shrubs between 0 and I think 2 meters, and 1/10 of a meter for grasses between 0 meter and 1 meter. So we've improved the thematic resolution of this data set using LiDAR predominantly. So again, back to Red Hills, you can see the variation in the tree canopy cover here. LANDFIRE 2014 on the left, it's there. You can see there's a lot of variation in the cover. On the right, they look pretty similar. They don't look that different. Fairly low tree cover in both cases. You see the wet area and the lakes in the middle, the developments, they look fairly similar. But if you zoom in on it, you'll start to see that there's a lot more variation in the cover over here. Remember, tall timbers is right here. This little orange strip right here is tall timbers. And you see basically only a couple of 3 categories of canopy cover, despite there being quite a variety of canopy covers in the image above. This captures more variation. Doesn't mean 2014 was wrong, it just didn't have the good thematic resolution. This has improved thematic resolution. Again, zoomed in, you can see all the different colors of pixel: darker green, higher tree canopy cover; darker orange, higher herb canopy cover; darker brown, higher shrub canopy cover. So let's move up into the Piedmont, into the upland. This is a part of the Southeast geo area. We do have the Piedmonts of Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina, but not the Piedmont of North Carolina is mapped in the Northeast. So again, plantations in black. In this case, orange are recent cutovers. So this should be expected around Greensboro. This is Lake Oconee, Greensboro. Went all over this during all those graduate years at the University of Georgia. So this is a highly intensive pine management area. Again, the plantations look more natural, looks more realistic, lots of cutover identified as a change product in this area. And this is the canopy cover for this particular area. High canopy cover. That should be expected here based on the conditions on the landscape. Okay, let's go to a completely different area. This is Angola Bay, North Carolina. Spent a summer down in that area working at one point in these Pecosins and bays. And so I just picked out this area just because I'd heard of it. So I never really been to this specific area before. But this is the existing vegetation type in LANDFIRE 2016. So I think this is Angola Bay. All this sort of aqua blue is a Pecosin existing vegetation type. This lighter blue is sort of a longleaf wet pine savanna. Black, again, is plantations. In this case, yellow is cropland. I didn't try to go in and, it's not longleaf, it's actually cropland on this case. And again, a lot of these oranges are cutover. So you see that this is a very realistic looking landscape. It's probably not perfect. You see some oddities here, like a plantation out here sort of on the edge of the bay. We'll look at something else here in a minute that'll kind of bring that to fore. But this is a nice picture of what the LANDFIRE data looks like at the landscape scale. So this is the canopy cover data for this area. And you can see there are some odd things going on here in the south side of the bay that maybe aren't picked up in a vegetation type, but are picked up in canopy cover. Here is that funny looking thing that I called a plantation. Down here, it called these areas longleaf pine savannas. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what they were called in the product. Cut over, you see these oranges, and you can see these plantations out here in this heavier, dense canopy cover. And again, this is tree height. So the point I want to make here is there is an estimate of vegetation height, cover, and type for every acre in the U.S. They are all compatible. You're not going to get a tree height in an area that we mapped as a shrub type. Everything's going to match thematically and geometrically from top to bottom, okay? That's one of the criteria that we have to measure from. And also remember that we then use these existing vegetation type, cover, and height products, plus some weather assumptions and some site data to actually derive fuels. So fuel layers, SBFM 40 is derived from these particular layers. Canopy bulk density, canopy base height are modeled from plot data, okay? But you get those estimates for every acre on the U.S. consistently done across the entire U.S. and across the entire Southeast. So talk just a minute about biophysical settings. So this is a separate product. This is not spatial. This is a review. There were at one point 2,000 of these models. We sent them out for review. The colors on this map indicate where we got responses. And unfortunately, you see light purple down here in Southeast. We didn't get a lot of response for external review of this product from outside. We did do an internal review. Would have preferred to get a lot of external review. We didn't get it. But in some cases, for some types, like longleaf, we got a lot. For other types, we got very little. So there is a little bit of a spotty result in terms of the review of the biophysical settings. And the thing to remember about BPS, whenever LANDFIRE uses that term, BPS, biophysical settings, that means historic, pre-European settlement, not current. That's an important thing for you to remember. Those are our estimate of conditions in the past, not current. Every biophysical setting has a quantitative state and transition model like this. It describes quantitatively how the vegetation moves through time and by disturbance. So fire, insect disease, could be hurricanes or whatever. Vegetation moves around the different succession states, and we have quantitative assessments or predictions of how these ecosystems operated pre-European settlement. For every native ecological system on the map, we have one of these biophysical settings models. We also have a pretty thorough description. In this case, this is East Gulf Coastal Plain Interior Upland Longleaf Pine Woodland, originally developed by Ken Outcalt many years ago, but reviewed recently by Tim Christensen with DOD. It applies to these map zones, and it's a multi-page description of what we mean by this biophysical setting. It includes how we map those different succession states. These are the rules that LANDFIRE uses to map those succession states. Here are the parameters of the model. Here's how we grow the vegetation through time in succession. Here's how we disturb the vegetation through time to create those models. So these models and descriptions will be available to you when the LANDFIRE fire regime products are delivered. They will match those products. These revised BPS models and descriptions will not match the original LANDFIRE products because we've had to recode them because there was a significant change into the number of models. So let's take a look at example applications. This data was only delivered a couple of months ago. I didn't have time to find out any recent applications. So I'm going to focus on some big programs that utilize the LANDFIRE.
Hey, Jim, I think your audio is cut out. Can you still hear?
Hey, Dave, I'll text him.
Okay, sounds good. All right, you guys will hold on just a minute. We'll see if we can get Jim back on the line. He had to call in, so maybe something happened on his phone. But we'll get him back on the line in just a minute if we can, and we'll keep going through the rest of his presentation. In the meantime, if you have questions, it's a good time to go ahead and put those in the Q&A window so that we'll have those ready for Jim to respond to when we get him back on the line at the end. Not sure, let's see. He's still going. Let's see. Hey, Megan, it's possible he can't get a text while he's called in. So I'm going to stop his share for just a moment, and we'll see if that'll get his attention here.
Hey, Dave, one option is you could put some sort of message to him. I don't know if you can stop his presentation or somehow take control. I don't have that capability on my end.
I'm going to stop his now.
His phone is on airplane mode, so it went straight to voicemail, unfortunately.
I'm sharing my screen now. We'll see if we can hail him in the chat. We'll see if he picks those up. Like I said, in the meantime, if you have questions, we can put them in. This is a good time to put them into the Q&A window. And appreciate your patience as we try and get Jim's audio working again.
Dave's working on that. One other thing to note is the good news is Jim was almost finished. So, and we were able to capture all of these questions. And so if for some reason he's in Florida and you guys get some weird weather down there in the South. So perhaps if we cannot get him back, we can grab these questions and he can answer them and get back in touch with everybody. So Jim, if you can hear me, we can't hear you. So we're still trying to tune back in, and thanks for hanging with us, guys. We'll keep trying to get him back on, but like I said, if we can't, we will grab questions and respond to you guys individually.
You've got his email address on the screen if you'd like to connect with Jim, or if you need to reach out to him about the LANDFIRE program. We sent some links for LANDFIRE in the chat window earlier. And for those who need it, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and put the webinar CFE link in the chat window. So if you are looking for Society of American Foresters CFE credit for participating in the webinar today, please use that Qualtrics link. It should be in the chat window now. If you click on that, it'll bring up a short survey in your browser that asks a couple of questions with your contact information and your SAF number and your state registered forester number if you have one. Please use that to provide your information, and we will use that to provide some information for you afterwards about SAF CFE credit. That usually takes us a couple of weeks to get through at the most, so we appreciate your patience as we get through those. For those who would like to participate in our webinar survey and evaluation that has a few short questions that our program at the Southern Fire Exchange uses to guide and evaluate our webinar program, and it helps us to identify critical topics for future webinars so that they meet your fire science needs. We also have questions in there that the folks from the LANDFIRE team can use as part of their process for designing future webinars to be able to meet the users' needs in the LANDFIRE community. Once again, we're sorry to have lost audio connection with Jim. We're still working to see if we can get that lined up. In the meantime, we really appreciate you joining our webinar today and participating.
Thanks for hanging with us, folks. It looks like Jim is trying to reconnect to the webinar, so everybody wouldn't mind just hanging tight for one more second. He looks like he's trying to come back. And
Okay.
Jim,
Sorry, for some reason the phone was cut off and it wouldn't let me back in.
weird. Now we got you loud and clear. So I think
Okay.
Dave will probably stop sharing his
Yep.
screen. We still have over 80 people with us, so we're good to go. Don't worry about it.
All righty, well, we
Good to
all
have you
love
back.
technology, don't we?
Yep, good to have you back, Jim. I'm gonna
Yeah.
stop my share here and you can go ahead and bring your slides back up.
All right,
Thanks
here we go.
everybody who hung with us. And Jim, we had a bunch of questions come in.
Well, good. So I'd like to
your audio
spend
cut
time
out.
on the questions if I could. But let's, did you see these slides, David?
Yeah, we did not get to the take-home messages.
Okay, so, and again, my apologies. Life with webinars is sometimes interesting. So the message I want you to leave with is that these are new products. They are not updates of old products. We still have the same desires that we had before to be comprehensive, compatible, as current and as consistent as possible. The native application scale is large landscape, regional and national, so be careful about that. But we have worked with many, many people to modify the data for local use if you don't have something else. And what we have is a good starting point for you. We will help you. That is basically any of the different products that LANDFIRE creates. Our evidence is that the new processes and data sets have improved the usability of the products, but I really need to hear from you about that. What do you find as a user of the data sets? Are they more efficient, more effective for you? Are they not? What are the issues? You're the reason we do this. We need to know what worked and what didn't work. And that's the importance of this feedback that we get. LANDFIRE has changed many, many, many things based on user feedback. Many significant things are different now because of the user feedback. So we need that more, such as the undermapping of plantations. We need to hear those things so that we can improve. You can email the help desk at LANDFIRE. They'll pass it around to whoever's the best person to answer that question. You can go to the landfire.gov website and there's a contact us. You can also send information in there. Or here are some others. This is the home website, landfire.gov. This is our website for science. Some things that we talk about are things like applications. We have blogs about the data sets, about other things here on the Conservation Gateway. We have a Twitter site. We have a YouTube site. Importantly, we have a monthly postcard that if you opt into it once a month, you'll get a postcard that has stories, news announcements, tips and tricks, things like that that may help you. And then TNC also has a LANDFIRE mailbox that comes to us directly. So if you want to contact us directly, that would be fine as well. If we need to send it on to the help desk, we will do that, okay? So the important thing is that you learn more about it, you use it, you look at it, you provide feedback to us on what you're seeing so that we can improve over time. So now it's, I think if we can answer questions, I think that's probably the best thing, David.
All right, Jim, thanks. I'm so glad we were able to get you back online again and we could let you finish up your presentation there. As Jim mentioned, this is the time in the presentation for you to provide your questions through the Q&A tool in Zoom, and we will go through those as best we can, and Jim will be able to respond to them. So here's one of the ones that came in, and the question is, what is the classification method for LANDFIRE? How much is done manually, and how much is artificial intelligence based? And if so, AI, what AI algorithms are used?
Yeah, it is, I would say primarily, if not exclusively, based on statistical classification techniques. There are a lot of different techniques that are available to do that, such as random forest or regression tree or whatever. What you call AI or not AI, I think probably is debatable, but they do use modeling techniques like regression tree or random, etc. They tried a lot of different techniques, and I believe that they, and I'm not in the production team, but I believe that they decided that they got a similar product more quickly using the regression tree techniques, which is a little bit older than random forest. But they are using these classification techniques to create the base products. EVC, EVH are delivered from a classification algorithm. There's really no manual part of this process other than examining it, deciding whether or not you think it's good or not, trying something else if you think it's not, okay? So I hope that answers the question. I think you could count on regression tree being the most likely candidate for these products.
Okay, here's another question that came in. The question is there a consistent way of crosswalking ecological systems to NVS groups? Or does each local situation need to be evaluated individually? If the former, they asked, is there a reference that shows which ecological systems are included in each NVS group? A crosswalk, I suppose.
Okay, so in the other original versions of LANDFIRE, there was a crosswalk between ecological systems and NVC group. And like most crosswalks, pretty clean about 80% of the time and a little bit messy about 20% of the time. So that crosswalk you would find in the attribute table of the previous LANDFIRE products. You could see which ecological systems are in which groups. But the new product, 2016, those are largely independently created. So there is no crosswalk between ecological systems and NVC group in LANDFIRE 2016 existing vegetation type product.
We had a couple of questions that came in about the plot data you mentioned. Could you talk about the sources of the plot data? And could you also speak to whether or not the plot locations or data sources are available to be shared? Okay,
so basically any data set anyone would provide to us, and we can actually make a map at a coarse scale of where the plots are located. So I think that could be provided to someone who is interested. But we also used FIA plots. Of course, those we cannot give those out You cannot give the locations of those out. That's basically against the law. Other data sets may have been considered proprietary. We give people submitting those data sets the option to make them public or not. So some data sets are not public, some are. There's about 1.1 or million plots in the database. Many of those are old. Many of those, of course, have been disturbed or harvested or something over the years. So there are a lot. I think we probably use somewhere around 100,000 plots in the Southeast to map. That would be my guess. I don't have an exact number on that. So we can provide information, general information on all plots, but specific information on only a few plots. You can download the non-proprietary plot from landfire.gov. Those are public and they are downloadable on the website.
We had a question came in about using local data with LANDFIRE data. And the question is, to use local data with LANDFIRE data, is it just simply inputted into the landscape scale maps with LANDFIRE software and database things? So I think that the question kind of ties back to how do people access LANDFIRE data? And then for someone not familiar with LANDFIRE data at all, you know, how could they then use these data sets if they've never seen or interacted with LANDFIRE before?
Okay. Well, I read that first question a little differently, David, so I'm going to answer it, I think, okay, which is LANDFIRE does not incorporate local spatial data sets, for instance, say vegetation type, or you had a cover data set or a fuels data set. LANDFIRE does not, so to speak, cookie cutter those in to the product. They will if somebody sends feedback that says, these areas over here, you know, you had FBFM 12, but all that stuff is now cut and it's really a different, you know, then LANDFIRE will try to take that into account, but they do not incorporate local data into the product production process. They will look at it to process, but it is not inserted in, okay? So hopefully that is what they asked. That's the way I heard that question, David.
Okay.
As far as using it locally, what we have done with people normally is if you've not used raster data, where this is raster data sets, 30-meter raster data sets, so you have to have some sort of software like ARC or QGIS or something like that to use these data sets. Open them up and we just basically cruise through them and see what they look like. And there are videos online that show people how to modify groups of pixels or individual pixels or change the value of pixels. So that's in effect how we sort of work with people to make the data useful for them at their scale as best we can. So it's basically about data. Does it have the right pattern of vegetation? Does it contain the right types? Do the vegetation types appear generally on the right areas of the landscape? That kind of thing is basically a local review, and we will help you the data using raster editing tools for local application if we can.
Great. Here's a question that came in. How were wetland vegetation types determined? Was it based on hydric soil map units, National Wetland Inventory, or other methods?
You know, I can't say sure again because I'm not a part of the mapping process. But one thing you could do, you'll go to the site and look at those category agreement tables. It would tell you explicitly for each category that you're interested in whether or not we pulled it from somewhere else, like National Land Cover Data or cropland data layers or National Wetland Inventory or whatever. It would tell you pulled that data from somewhere else, national data set, and used it in LANDFIRE. However, I believe that many, if not most, wetland types were modeled by using plots. Say, you know, marsh grass or riparian areas or canebrake or whatever, those kinds of things. were, I believe, usually modeled by LANDFIRE using the classification techniques and field plots. They may have used things like NWI maps or something like that as sort of a check against it to see if they were getting somewhere similar. I don't know, but that would certainly be a possibility. So check those categories that you're interested in the example and see if they were pulled or if we mapped them.
And one last question we'll get to, and then we will wrap up, Jim. And this is from Chuck. And Chuck says, what classification system is used to name the rural or developed classification in LANDFIRE?
Well, yeah, those are not ecological systems, but we have, you know, we have all these plots and we get all this plot information and we run those plots through what we call an auto key, which was on NatureServe with help from LANDFIRE and to actually assign some cover type, if I want to call it that, to every plot, okay? So we have a separate key, rural key, that we run the plots through that would assign a rural type to it based on that key. That's how we classified it using the rules within that, actually like an automated dichotomous key. It uses field plot information. So I don't know if we could say there's a classification system for rural. So those auto keys are available. We could provide them if they want to use them, if they want to examine them. What rules were used, I'm out of my league, I don't know. What rules were used to describe a rural type, we could certainly provide those auto keys. You know, we have what they call sequence tables, which are like dichotomous tables that we run the plots through in their classification. So I hope that gives you an idea of what the rural and other sort of types, like for instance, warm, temperate, close grown crop. You know, that's not an ecological system, but it is a type in our map. So the same type of thing, we assign that to a type using a key.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jim. It looks like we've run up to the end of our time allotment today. For everyone on the line, if you would like to follow up with Jim, if you have additional questions or would like to follow up with some of the questions you've already asked, you can see his contact information is now on the screen. As we said earlier, if you would like to apply for Society of American Foresters CFE credit for participating today, the links are in the chat window for both the CFE form and also the evaluation form for our webinar today. Today's webinar was recorded, and we will have the recording on our Southern Fire Exchange YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. And you can also look to the YouTube channel or the webinar archive of our partners with the TNC LANDFIRE program. They'll probably be having a recording of it up there as well. Finally, as we close out the webinar, we do ask that you please take just a couple of minutes to fill out the short questionnaire that will open up in your browser window, and let SFE, as well as our LANDFIRE partners, know your thoughts on the webinar today and how we might be able to, in the future, improve our webinars to meet your fire science and LANDFIRE needs. So thank you so much, Jim. I'm glad we were able to get you back on the line for the Q&A, and thanks, Megan, for your support today. It was great to work with y'all. And thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today and online on Facebook. Appreciate all the good conversation and the questions that we had. So have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jim.
Oh, that was fun.